My billionaire husband just gave my penthouse to my sister without asking me. The same sister who hasn't called in 6 months. The same sister who told our mother I married for money. He didn't even look up from his phone when he said it, like I was supposed to smile and accept being erased from my own life. What Fred didn't know was that I'd been planning for this exact moment for 7 years, and the penthouse he just gave away? He never owned it in the first place, still scrolling through emails, still not looking at me. His voice had that corporate tone he used in board meetings. Reasonable, unquestionable, infuriating. I sat perfectly still. The marble floor suddenly felt too hard beneath my feet. The dining room too bright, too big, too empty despite him sitting right there. "Ruth needs stability right now," Fred said. Like that explained everything. Like that made this okay. "She's going through some troubles." Troubles. If you're thinking this sounds absolutely insane, you're right. My sister Ruth. The same Ruth who hadn't called me in 6 months. The same Ruth who'd skipped our last 3 family dinners. The same Ruth who'd told our mother I'd married for money and nothing else. That Ruth was getting my home. And Fred thought I'd just accept it. I need you to understand something. Ruth has always been the golden child, the straight A student while I was the creative one. The Yale graduate while I went to community college, the successful lawyer while I was just the artist who got lucky. All my life I've been the shadow to her spotlight, the understudy to her leading role, the backup plan to her main event, and here it was happening again. Even in my own marriage, even in my own home. "When?" I heard myself ask. My voice sounded strange, distant, like it belonged to someone else entirely. Fred finally looked up from his phone. His blue eyes held mild impatience, like I was taking too long to close a simple business deal. "Next month," he said. "She needs to be out of her current situation quickly." Her current situation. Another vague reference. Another mystery I wasn't important enough to know about. Can you imagine? My husband making massive decisions about our life. And I'm the last to know. The last to matter. I watched Fred reach for his water glass. His Rolex caught the light. Platinum and diamonds. The one I'd given him for our 5th anniversary last year. He'd barely said thank you. "I assume that's fine with you," Fred said. Not a question. An assumption. And here's where it gets worse. I felt that old familiar ache spreading through my chest. The one that started when I was 7 years old, when Ruth won the spelling bee and got a party. I came in 2nd place. Nobody remembered. The ache that grew when Ruth got into Yale and Dad cried with pride. I'd gotten into a good school, too. Nobody cared. The ache that solidified when Ruth made partner at her firm. The whole family celebrated for weeks. I'd just sold 3 paintings at a major gallery. Nobody came to the opening. Now, here was that ache again, familiar as my own heartbeat, that crushing weight of being perpetually second, always the afterthought, always the one who didn't quite matter enough. But something was different this time. Something had shifted inside me over the years, something Fred didn't know about, something nobody knew about. Let that sink in for a moment. Fred was watching me now, waiting for my response. His jaw set in that way it did when deals took too long. I could see him calculating behind those cold blue eyes, assuming I'd be the accommodating wife, the understanding one, the one who smiled and nodded and made his life easier. So that's exactly what I gave him. I smiled, small, quiet, perfectly controlled. "Of course," I said softly, "if Ruth needs it." I watched the tension leave his shoulders immediately. He actually looked relieved. My husband looked relieved that I wasn't going to fight him on giving away our home to my sister, without even asking me first. "I knew you'd understand," Fred said. He reached across the table, squeezed my hand briefly. His palm was warm. His grip was firm. His touch felt like a stranger's. "This is temporary," he added, "just until she gets back on her feet." Back on her feet from what? I wanted to scream it. What troubles? What situation? Why does Ruth always get rescued while I get forgotten? If your blood is boiling right now, mine was too. but I didn't say any of that. I just nodded, took a careful sip of my wine, let him think he'd won. Because Fred Billups might be a brilliant CEO, he might own half the skyscrapers in this city, he might be worth $3 billion. He might have his face on magazine covers, but he had absolutely no idea who he'd really married. He had no idea what I'd been building in the shadows, the offshore accounts in my name only, the investment portfolio he'd never bothered to ask about, the properties he didn't know I owned, the plans I'd been making for years. Fred thought I was the grateful artist wife who'd married up, the lucky girl who got saved by a billionaire. Dependent, manageable, invisible. Who does that? Who underestimates their own wife so completely? Fred stood up from the table. "I have a call with Singapore in 5 minutes," he said. Always working, always building his empire, never noticing he was standing on a foundation that was about to crack. He kissed the top of my head, absent, automatic, the way you'd pat a dog. "Thanks for being so understanding, Nancy." His Italian leather shoes clicked against the marble as he walked away, each step echoing in our too big, too bright dining room, the dining room that would soon belong to my sister. I sat there alone. The chandelier sparkled above me, the city stretched endlessly beyond our windows, and I took another slow sip of wine, because Fred Billups might own skyscrapers, but he had no idea what he didn't own. He didn't own me. He never had. And he was about to find that out the hard way. This story didn't start today in this dining room. It started 30 years ago, in a tiny apartment with a single mother and 2 daughters, one golden, one invisible. And if you want to understand how we got here, if you want to understand what Fred just set in motion, you need to know where I came from. You need to know what I survived. You need to know who Nancy Butler really is. I wasn't always the wife of a billionaire. There was a time when luxury meant having hot water for a full shower. When I was 8 years old, Ruth was 10. Mom worked 3 jobs just to keep us fed. She cleaned office buildings from midnight to 6 a.m. She waitressed at the diner during lunch shifts. She did data entry on weekends from our tiny apartment. I still remember the sound of her keys in the door at 2 in the morning, the exhaustion in every footstep, the way she'd stand in our doorway watching us sleep, like she needed to make sure we were still real, still there, still hers. Our apartment was 400 square feet, 1 bedroom for Mom. Ruth and I shared a pull-out couch in the living room. The radiator clanked all winter, but never quite warmed the place. The faucet dripped no matter how many times the landlord fixed it. But it was ours, and Mom made sure we never went to bed hungry, even if that meant she did. Ruth was brilliant even back then. Straight A's without even trying. Teachers loved her immediately. She had this spark that made people stop and pay attention. The kind of shine I never had. Now pause for a second. I wasn't jealous of Ruth, not at first. I was proud of her, my big sister who was going to save us all someday. But Ruth was also wildly impulsive, reckless in ways that terrified me. She never thought about consequences, never considered what might happen after, like the time she convinced Tommy Brennan to let her ride his new bike. She crashed it into a fence within 20 minutes, bent the front wheel completely. Tommy's mom called our apartment screaming. Mom cried, not angry tears, defeated tears, the kind that said she couldn't handle one more thing. I was 9 years old. I spent the next 2 weeks doing extra chores for the Hoffmans down the hall, babysitting their twins for $3 an hour. I gave every penny to Tommy's mom for the repairs. $42 total. Ruth said thank you once and never mentioned it again. I need you to understand something. This became my job, fixing Ruth's mistakes, smoothing over her chaos, making sure Mom didn't have to worry about one more single thing. If you've ever been the responsible sibling, you know exactly what I mean. You grow up fast when someone needs constant protecting. When Ruth was 12, she got caught shoplifting, nail polish from the drugstore. Not because we couldn't afford it, though we couldn't, but because her friends dared her and Ruth never backed down from a dare. The store manager called Mom at work. She had to leave her waitressing shift early, lost a day's pay because of it. I held Mom's hand that night while she cried at our kitchen table. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered. "I'll talk to her," I promised. "I'll make sure she stays out of trouble." I was 10 years old making promises I had no idea how to keep, but I kept them anyway. By age 13, I had my first real job, babysitting for the Hoffmans 3 nights a week. Then I added the Kowalskis on weekends, $5 an hour. I saved every penny in a shoebox under our pull-out couch. Ruth would ask to borrow money sometimes. For school trips, she just had to go on. For shoes, everyone else had. For things she wanted but absolutely didn't need. I always said yes. Because that's what you do, right? You protect the people you love. Even when they don't protect you back. Even when they don't even notice. Then Mom got sick. I was 15. Ruth was 17. Stage 3 breast cancer. The words felt too enormous for our tiny apartment, too heavy for our already breaking family. Ruth completely fell apart. She'd always been dramatic, but this was different. She stopped going to school, locked herself in our shared space for hours, cried until she threw up, had panic attacks that lasted so long I thought she might die too. Can you imagine? Someone had to hold everything together. Someone had to make sure bills still got paid. Someone had to drive Mom to chemotherapy even with just a learner's permit. Someone had to forge Mom's signature on Ruth's school excuse notes. Someone had to lie to guidance counselors about why Ruth missed 37 days. Someone had to work extra babysitting hours to cover Mom's lost wages. That someone was always me. If your blood is boiling thinking about how much I carried, mine was too. But back then I thought that's what love looked like. Sacrifice, silence. Disappearing so others could survive. Mom survived the cancer. Barely. She beat it through sheer stubborn will. But the medical bills didn't survive. They multiplied. Stacks of envelopes with red stamps appeared daily. Past due, final notice, sent to collections. We were drowning in $30,000 of debt. On top of rent we could barely afford. And here's where it gets worse. Ruth got accepted to Yale, full academic scholarship. It was everything she'd ever dreamed about, everything Mom had prayed for, the golden ticket out of poverty. Except Yale still cost money. Books and housing deposits and meal plans and travel. Thousands of dollars we absolutely did not have. Ruth looked at me with those desperate, pleading eyes. "I can't go," she said, her voice breaking. "We can't afford it, Nancy. I can't leave you and Mom like this." I was 17 years old. I had $3,247 in my shoebox. 3 years of babysitting money. Money I'd saved for art school, for my own future, for my own dreams that I'd barely let myself imagine. I handed every single dollar to her. "Go," I told her. "I'll figure everything else out." She hugged me so tight I couldn't breathe. Promised she'd pay me back. Promised she'd make me proud. Promised this would change everything for our family. Let that sink in for a moment. I never saw that money again. But Ruth went to Yale, and Mom smiled for the first time in 18 months. And I took a full-time job at Morrison's hardware store, 40 hours a week at $8.50 an hour. I gave up on art school completely, enrolled in community college night classes instead. After work, after exhaustion, after everything. It was fine, I told myself. This was fine. Then Grandpa Joseph died, Mom's father. We hadn't seen him in over 15 years. Some old fight Mom refused to discuss. Something about him disapproving of our father. About him cutting Mom off when she got pregnant with Ruth. But apparently he'd felt guilty at the end because he left us something in his will. Property, 110 acres in rural Pennsylvania. When the estate lawyer showed us pictures, my heart sank straight through the floor. It was nothing. Absolutely nothing. Overgrown fields full of weeds, a collapsed barn that was basically kindling, a farmhouse with a completely caved-in roof. "This is worthless," Ruth said. She was home for winter break wearing designer clothes her Yale friends probably bought. We should sell it immediately and split whatever we can get. But Mom wouldn't hear it. It's the last thing we truly own, she said quietly, her eyes far away, remembering something painful. Your grandfather wanted you girls to have this. It means something. She made us promise right there, made us swear we'd never sell it without both of us agreeing, made us sign papers with the estate lawyer. Equal ownership. Nancy Butler and Ruth Butler, 50-50 forever. I looked at that property deed like it was a life raft in the ocean. This was ours. This was something real and tangible, something no bill collector could take away, something that proved we came from somewhere, that we mattered, that we existed. Think about that. A worthless piece of land became the most valuable thing I owned, not because of what it was, but because of what it represented. Proof that we'd survived. I made a vow standing in that lawyer's office. I would protect my family no matter what it cost me, no matter what I had to sacrifice, no matter what I had to give up. Mom needed me. Ruth needed me. And I would never ever let them down. I got a second job, then a third. Hardware store in the mornings, coffee shop in the afternoons, freelance graphic design on weekends. I sent Ruth money when she called asking, which was often. I paid down Mom's medical bills slowly, $20 here, $50 there. I kept our family afloat through sheer force of will, and quietly, secretly, I started investing. Nothing big at first, just small amounts in stocks I researched at the public library, index funds, real estate crowdfunding platforms. I taught myself everything from books and free internet at the library, because I'd learned something crucial. No one was coming to save me. No one was going to hand me scholarships. No one was going to pay me back. If I wanted security, I had to build it myself. Ruth graduated Yale with honors 4 years later, got hired at a prestigious Manhattan law firm, moved to a luxury apartment, called me maybe once every few months, usually when she needed something. Mom was so proud. Look at Ruth, she'd say, beaming, living the dream, making something of herself. No one ever asked about my dreams, but that was okay. I'd learned to dream quietly, in spreadsheets, in investment accounts, in carefully planned futures no one knew existed. By 25, I had $47,000 invested. By 27, I had $89,000. I lived in a studio apartment that cost $400 a month. I drove a 15-year-old Honda with 200,000 miles. I bought all my clothes at Goodwill, but I was building something that was mine, something no one could take away. I just didn't know yet how much bigger it would become, or that the property Grandpa Joseph left us would change everything, or that a man named Fred Billups would walk into my life and turn everything I thought I knew upside down. I was 27 years old when everything changed. Mom's cancer had come back. Stage 4 this time. The doctors used words like aggressive and limited options and experimental treatments not covered by insurance. I was 3 months behind on rent. My landlord had taped an eviction notice to my door. Bright orange paper that screamed failure for all my neighbors to see. My Honda finally died completely. 200,000 miles was apparently its limit. I was working 3 jobs and still drowning. So I did something I'd never done before. I applied for a corporate job. Billups Enterprises, the biggest real estate development company in the state. I had no qualifications, no corporate experience, no business degree, just desperation and a resume I'd created at the library, 1 page that barely said anything worth reading. But I applied anyway, because I had nothing left to lose. Now pause for a second. I didn't expect to get an interview. I expected the automated rejection email. Thank you for your interest, but we've decided to move forward with other candidates. Instead, I got a phone call 3 days later. Ms. Butler, this is Billups Enterprises. Mr. Billups would like to meet with you tomorrow at 9 a.m. I almost dropped the phone. The day of the interview, I wore my only professional outfit, Black blazer from Target, 5 years old. Skirt I'd hemmed myself because alterations cost money I didn't have. Shoes I'd polished until they almost looked new. Almost. I took 2 buses to get downtown, 45 minutes each way. Left an hour early just to make sure I wouldn't be late. The Billups Enterprises building was 60 stories of glass and steel. It reflected the morning sun like it was made of light itself. I stood on the sidewalk staring up at it. This was a mistake. I didn't belong here. But I walked through those revolving doors anyway. The lobby took my breath away completely. Marble floors that looked like mirrors. A fountain in the center with water that somehow flowed upward. Furniture that probably cost more than my entire year's salary. People in $1,000 suits moving with purpose and confidence. I felt like a fraud in my Target blazer. The receptionist looked at me like I'd tracked mud across her perfect floor. "Nancy Butler," I said. "I have a 9 o'clock interview." She barely glanced at me, typed something into her computer. 47th floor, security will escort you up. Security scanned my driver's license, took my photo, printed a visitor badge that felt like it was labeling me. Temporary, doesn't belong, will be leaving soon. The elevator ride to the 47th floor lasted forever. My reflection stared back at me from polished steel doors. I looked exactly like what I was. Tired, desperate, completely out of my depth. The doors opened directly into an executive suite, glass walls everywhere, city views that went on forever, plants that were probably worth more than my rent. "Ms. Butler?" A woman in her 50s approached, designer suit, perfect hair, smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Billups will see you now." She led me down a hallway lined with awards and magazine covers. Forbes, Fortune, Business Weekly, all featuring the same man. Fred Billups, self-made billionaire at 38. Built his empire from a single property flip at 23, now owned commercial real estate across 3 states. I'd researched everything I could find about him, but nothing prepared me for the real thing. The woman opened massive mahogany doors without knocking. "Ms. Butler for you, sir." I walked into Fred Billups's office, and here's where it gets worse. He wasn't what I expected at all. Fred stood by floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the entire city. 6'2", dark hair perfectly styled, suit that probably cost more than my car used to be worth, but it was his eyes that stopped me completely. Blue, sharp, intelligent, eyes that saw everything and missed absolutely nothing. "Nancy Butler," he said, not a question, a statement, like he was testing how my name sounded in his voice. "Mr. Billups." I was surprised my voice came out steady. "Thank you for seeing me." He gestured to a leather chair across from his desk. "Sit." It wasn't an invitation, it was a command. I sat. He didn't. Instead, he moved to his desk and picked up a single sheet of paper. My resume. 1 page, barely filled, practically empty. "Community college," he read aloud. 3 part-time jobs currently. Freelance graphic design, no corporate experience whatsoever, no MBA, no degree from anywhere that matters in business. Each word felt like a door slamming in my face. "You're right," I said quietly. His eyes snapped to mine. Something flickered there. Surprise, maybe. "I'm right?" he repeated slowly. "Yes," I met his gaze directly. "I don't have the credentials you're looking for, but I'm here anyway." Let that sink in for a moment. I don't know what possessed me to be that honest. Maybe desperation, maybe exhaustion. Maybe I was just tired of pretending to be something I wasn't. "Why?" Fred asked. He leaned against his desk, arms crossed, studying me like I was a puzzle he was trying to solve. "Why are you here, Nancy Butler?" "Because I need a job," I said simply. "Because I'm better at this than my resume shows. Because I work harder than anyone else you'll ever interview." "Everyone says they work hard," Fred said dismissively. "No," I shook my head. "Everyone says they work hard. I actually do it. 3 jobs, 7 days a week. I haven't taken a single day off in 4 years." Fred's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air between us. Something electric, something dangerous. "Tell me about the Riverside Project," he said suddenly. The Riverside Project. I'd read about it during my research. Billups Enterprises' biggest failure last year, a luxury development on the east side that had lost millions. "That's a test," I said. "Obviously." The hint of a smile touched his lips. "So answer it." I took a breath. This was it, my only shot. "You built luxury condos in a working-class neighborhood," I began. "Premium prices in an area where median income was $40,000 annually. You assumed gentrification would follow your investment. It didn't." Fred said nothing, just watched me with those impossibly blue eyes, waiting. "The problem wasn't the development itself," I continued. "It was understanding your audience. Young professionals want walkability, nightlife, culture, restaurants. You built in a food desert with no public transportation and nothing to do." "I need you to understand something. I was lecturing a billionaire on real estate, with my 5-year-old Target blazer and my desperation hanging around me like cheap perfume. If this is making your blood boil right now, do me a favor. Hit that like button, because every woman who's ever been underestimated needs to hear this story. And drop a comment below. What would you have done in my position? Would you have taken the job, but I couldn't stop now?" "So what would you have done differently?" Fred asked. His voice was softer now, genuinely curious. "Affordable housing," I said. "Partner with the city for tax incentives, create a community center, attract small businesses with reduced first-year rent, build an actual neighborhood, not just buildings that sit empty." "That's idealistic," Fred countered. "Not profitable." "It's sustainable," I argued back. "Profit doesn't matter if you have zero occupancy. You lost $15 million on Riverside. Affordable housing with steady 90% occupancy would have made money within 5 years. Can you imagine?" Fred stared at me for what felt like forever. Then he smiled. Actually smiled. "You've done your homework," he said. "I always do." He moved around his desk and sat down in his leather chair, picked up an expensive pen, tapped it against my pathetic resume. "I'm not hiring for the position you applied for," he said. My heart sank straight through the floor. Of course not. I'd been stupid to think. "I'm creating a new position," Fred continued. "Community development liaison. Someone who understands both business and people. Someone who sees what I miss." I stared at him, unable to process what I was hearing. "You're offering me a job?" "I'm offering you an opportunity," Fred corrected. $70,000 a year, full benefits, premium health insurance, direct report to me personally." $70,000. I made $32,000 working 3 jobs. This was impossible. This wasn't real. "There's one condition," Fred said, his blue eyes locked onto mine, serious now, almost severe. "Think about that." "What condition?" I managed to ask. "Don't lie to me, Nancy Butler," he said. His voice was steel wrapped in silk. "About what?" I whispered. "About anything. Ever." Fred leaned forward. "I value honesty above competence. I can teach you business. I cannot teach you integrity. If you lie to me once, just once, you're done. No second chances, no explanations. Just done. If you're thinking this sounds like a red flag, you're absolutely right. But I wasn't thinking about red flags. I was thinking about Mom's experimental treatments, about $70,000 versus 32, about premium health insurance, about rent I could actually afford, about finally breathing. What about love? I heard myself ask. The question came from nowhere. Fred paused, studied me carefully. "This is a job, Nancy, not a relationship." But the way he said it, the way his eyes held mine just a moment too long, I felt it in my chest, in my bones. This was more than a job interview. "I agree to your condition," I said. "I won't lie to you." Fred stood and extended his hand across the desk. "Welcome to Billups Enterprises." I stood on shaking legs, reached across and shook his hand. His palm was warm, his grip was firm. The handshake lasted 3 seconds too long. We both knew it. Neither of us let go. When I finally pulled my hand back, electricity was still buzzing up my arm. Fred was still watching me, not professionally, not appropriately, with something that made my stomach flip. "Start Monday," he said, 8 a.m. sharp. "Don't be late." "I won't be," I promised. I walked to the door, my hand on the handle. "Nancy," Fred called. I turned back. He was standing now, backlit by those enormous windows, looking like power personified. "I'm curious about something," he said. "What?" "Why you really need this job, His eyes pierced through me. "The real reason." I could have lied, should have kept it professional, but I just promised never to lie to him. "My mother has stage 4 cancer," I said quietly. "I'm 3 months behind on rent, and I'm tired of being invisible to everyone who's ever looked at me." Fred nodded slowly. "You're not invisible to me," he said. The weight behind those 5 words, I felt them everywhere. "See you Monday, Mr. Billups," I managed. "Fred," he corrected. "Call me Fred." I left before I could say anything else. The elevator ride down felt completely different than the ride up, like gravity had changed, like everything had changed. By the time I reached the street, my hands were shaking, not from fear, from that electricity, from that moment when our hands touched too long, from that look in his eyes that said his interest wasn't professional at all. I didn't know it then. But that handshake changed everything. That job offer wasn't just a job. That man wasn't just my new boss. And 7 years later, I'd be sitting in a penthouse dining room, watching that same man give away our home to my sister, without asking, without king, without remembering the woman he'd looked at like she was the only person in the world. Fred Billups saw me once, really, truly saw me, but he wouldn't see what was coming next. 6 months into working at Billups Enterprises, I found the problem. A $12 million problem that could destroy everything. It was 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. I was alone in my small office reviewing permit files for the Harrington Square development, Fred's flagship project, his biggest investment of the year, luxury retail and residential mixed use in the heart of downtown. That's when I saw it. The zoning permits were completely wrong. Someone had filed for commercial use in a residentially zoned area. The city was about to shut down the entire project. Construction was scheduled to start in 3 weeks. 60% of the units were already pre-sold. If this got out, it would be catastrophic. My hands actually shook as I printed the documents. I walked to Fred's office on the 47th floor. Light still glowed under his door. He was always here, always working, always building his empire. I knocked twice. "Come in," his voice called. Fred sat behind his desk, tie loosened, sleeves rolled up. He looked tired, more human than I usually saw him during business hours. "Nancy," surprise crossed his face. "It's late, what's wrong?" "We have a serious problem," I said. I laid the documents on his desk, watched his expression change as he read. Confusion, understanding, then pure fury. "How did this happen?" His voice was dangerously quiet. "Miller rushed the permits," I explained. "He missed the zoning classification entirely." Fred stood up abruptly, paced to the windows. His jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping. "This project breaks ground in 3 weeks," he said. "Investors are lined up. Pre-sales are finalized. If this gets out, we're finished." Now pause for a second. This was the moment that changed everything. I could have stopped there, done my job by identifying the problem, let Fred solve it himself. But I didn't. "I have an idea," I heard myself say. Fred turned to face me, those blue eyes intense, focused completely on me. "I'm listening." "My grandfather left me property," I began. 110 acres in rural Pennsylvania. It's undeveloped, looks worthless on paper. "And?" Fred's eyes narrowed with interest. "What if we rezone Harrington Square as mixed-use community space instead of pure commercial?" I continued. "Pivot from luxury retail to experience-based development, community markets, art installations, event spaces." That's a complete project redesign, Fred said. We'd lose months. Maybe the entire investment. Or we move forward with modified plans, I countered. We already have residential approval. We add community gathering spaces instead of retail. Create something people actually want instead of another empty luxury mall. Fred stared at me. That's brilliant. But investors need proof of concept, I said. Something to show we understand community-based development. I took a deep breath. This was it, the moment I'd been building toward without even knowing it. We develop my grandfather's property, I said. Rural revitalization project, sustainable housing, local business incubators. Show investors we can build communities, not just buildings. That would cost significant money, Fred said slowly. I'll sign over the property as collateral, I offered. Use it however you need to make Harrington Square work. Let that sink for a moment. I was offering the last thing my family truly owned, the property Mom made me promise never to sell, 50% of which belonged to Ruth. Fred moved closer, close enough that I could smell his cologne, cedar, and something expensive I couldn't name. Why would you do that? He asked quietly. Because it's the right solution, I said. No. Fred shook his head. Why would you risk your family's property for my company? His eyes searched mine, looking for something, an angle. Maybe a lie. But I'd promised never to lie to him. Because I believe in what you're building, I said honestly. And because if this company fails, I lose everything I've worked for too. Fred studied me for a long moment. You're extraordinary, he said finally. Not like a compliment, like he was stating an undeniable fact. I'm practical, I corrected. You're both. Fred smiled slightly. And I have a proposal for you. And here's where it gets worse, or maybe better. I still don't know which. Marry me, Fred said. I actually laughed. Thought he was joking. I'm serious, Fred said. Think about it, Nancy. A business arrangement, mutually beneficial for both parties. You want a business marriage? I said slowly. I want a partner, Fred corrected. Someone intelligent, someone I trust completely, someone who sees solutions where others see problems. He moved to his desk, pulled out a legal pad, started writing in quick, decisive strokes. Here's what I'm offering, he said. I pay off every penny of your mother's medical debt, all of it. I put you on my premium insurance plan. The best doctors, experimental treatments, whatever she needs. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear. I give you a generous monthly allowance, Fred continued. You manage my household, attend business events with me, play the role of Mrs. Billups for public appearances and investor meetings. And in return? My voice sounded far away. You give me respectability, Fred said. A stable marriage improves my image with conservative investors, family-oriented, trustworthy, settled instead of the playboy bachelor they worry about. If you're thinking this is insane, you're absolutely right, but I wasn't thinking clearly. I was thinking about Mom, about medical bills that never stopped coming, about working myself to death by 40, about finally having security. What about love? I asked. Fred paused, set down his pen. Love complicates things, he said carefully. This way is cleaner. We're colleagues, business partners. We keep emotions completely out of it. For how long? 5 years minimum, Fred said. After that, we renegotiate terms or separate amicably. Prenup in place, fair settlement. Everyone walks away whole. Have you ever dealt with someone like this? Someone who turns marriage into a business transaction? I should have said no. Should have walked out. Should have seen every single red flag waving. But I saw something else. I saw Mom getting the treatment she desperately needed. I saw myself mattering. I saw security for the first time in my entire life. I need time to think, I managed. Take 3 days, Fred said. But Nancy? Yes? I wouldn't ask if I didn't believe we could make this work. His voice softened. I respect you. I trust you. That's more than most married couples ever have. I called him 2 days later. "I'll do it," I said, "but I have conditions too." "Name them." "My mother never knows this is business," I said firmly. "As far as she's concerned, we're in love. She deserves to die believing I'm happy." "Agreed," Fred said immediately. "And I keep my financial independence," I continued. "My investments stay mine. My accounts stay completely separate." "Of course. And if we do this, we do it right," I said. "No half measures. If we're selling the illusion of marriage, we sell it completely." I wouldn't have it any other way. We married in a small courthouse ceremony 3 weeks later, just us and 2 witnesses Fred hired. Mom cried tears of pure joy on the phone when I told her. Ruth sent a $50 Target gift card. Didn't even come to the wedding. Fred bought me a ring that cost more than I'd made in 3 years. 4 carats, flawless, blinding. "For appearances," he said as he slid it onto my finger. But his hand lingered on mine, just a moment too long. I moved into the penthouse that weekend. All my belongings fit into 6 boxes, my entire life packed into one corner of his massive space. "Make it yours," Fred said. "Change whatever you want." So I tried. I hung artwork on the sterile white walls, paintings I'd collected over years, prints from artists I loved. I added throw pillows to the uncomfortable modern couches. I put books on the empty shelves. Real books, not the designer ones that match the decor. I bought plants for the too bright kitchen. I tried desperately to transform his business showroom into an actual home. But Fred treated it exactly the same as before. A place to sleep between meetings, a display for clients and investors, an example of wealth, not warmth. Can you imagine? I was decorating a beautiful cage and calling it home. But then there were moments, small, confusing moments that changed everything. Like when Fred came home at 2 a.m., found me painting in the spare bedroom I'd claimed as a studio. "You're talented," he said softly, studying my canvas. "You told me that the day we met," I replied. "I meant it then." He moved closer. "I mean it even more now." Or the night I couldn't sleep. Found him on the balcony at 3 a.m., staring at the city. "Can't shut your brain off?" I asked. "Never." He glanced at me. "You either?" "Never." We stood there in comfortable silence for over an hour. Not talking, not needing to. Just existing together. It felt more intimate than any conversation we'd ever had, or the morning I made coffee, brought him a cup at his home office desk without being asked. "Thank you," he said, genuinely surprised. "You're welcome." Our fingers brushed during the exchange. That electricity again. That dangerous thing we were both pretending not to feel. I know. I couldn't believe it either. We were business partners living together, colleagues playing house, roommates with a contract instead of a lease. But we were also laughing over takeout at midnight, finishing each other's sentences in meetings, learning each other's patterns and rhythms. I told myself repeatedly it didn't mean anything. This was just the arrangement. 5 years. Then freedom. But 3 months into our business marriage, Fred kissed me. Not for show. Not for investors or clients, just him and me alone in the kitchen on a random Tuesday morning. "That wasn't part of the contract," I whispered against his lips. "Sue me," he whispered back, and I kissed him again. Deeper this time. We never talked about it afterward, never acknowledged what was happening. We just kept pretending we were following the rules, while we systematically broke every single one. The line between business arrangement and real marriage kept blurring, getting thinner, more unstable, more dangerous every single day. I was falling for my husband, my fake husband, my business arrangement, and I had absolutely no idea if he felt the same or if this was just another transaction to him, another asset to manage. The woman who'd learned to be invisible was desperately trying to be seen by the one man who'd promised to keep emotions completely out of it. 3 years passed exactly like this. Blurry lines we never discussed, unspoken feelings that filled every room, a marriage that looked perfect from the outside and felt like standing on quicksand from the inside. Then Ruth called after 2 years of near silence. "Nancy, I need help," she said, her voice desperate, almost panicked, and just like that, everything we'd carefully built started to crack. Ruth showed up at the penthouse 3 days after that phone call, without warning, without asking, with 6 suitcases and tears streaming down her face. "Nancy, thank God you're home," she said, like we talked every day, like we were close, like she hadn't ignored me for 2 years straight. Fred was in his home office on a conference call. I stood in the doorway staring at my sister. She looked terrible, designer clothes wrinkled, makeup smudged, her usual perfect composure completely shattered. "What happened?" I asked. "Everything fell apart," Ruth sobbed. "My relationship ended. Marcus cheated on me with his paralegal. The firm let me go during restructuring. My apartment lease is up and I can't afford the rent anymore." She collapsed onto our white couch, still crying, still a mess, still expecting me to fix everything, just like always. "I'm so sorry, Ruth," I said, and I meant it. Despite everything, she was still my sister. "Can I stay here?" Ruth asked, "just for a few weeks until I figure things out?" Now pause for a second. I should have said no, should have helped her find a hotel, should have set boundaries. But old patterns die hard. "Of course," I heard myself say, "we have guest rooms." Ruth hugged me tight. "Thank you. You've always been the one who saves me." Fred emerged from his office 20 minutes later. "Ruth," he said, surprised, "Nancy mentioned you were having trouble." "I'm so sorry to intrude," Ruth said, suddenly composed, suddenly polished, the tears magically gone. "Nancy insisted I stay here while I get back on my feet." I didn't correct her, didn't point out she'd asked, not the other way around. "Of course," Fred said smoothly. "Stay as long as you need." That was 3 months ago. 3 months of Ruth living in my home. 3 months of everything slowly changing. 3 months of feeling like a stranger in my own life. It started small. Fred began having breakfast meetings with Ruth, just the 2 of them in the dining room, discussing her job search, he said, giving her career advice. I wasn't invited. Then came the lunch meetings downtown. Introducing Ruth to contacts, Fred explained, helping her network. He never invited me to those either. I'd see the charges on our credit card, expensive restaurants I'd never been to, places Fred had never taken me. Let that sink in for a moment. Then Ruth started attending Fred's business events, the charity galas, the investor dinners, the gallery openings. "Nancy, you hate these things," Fred said when I questioned it. "Ruth offered to go in your place. She's actually quite good at networking." I did hate those events, but I'd gone to every single one for 3 years, played the perfect wife, made the right impressions, and now I was being replaced by my own sister. At work, things got worse. Fred stopped including me in key meetings. My role shifted from community development liaison to essentially nothing. "We're restructuring," Fred said vaguely when I asked. "Your position is being phased out." 3 years of work, 3 years of building his community relations, gone. Ruth started coming to the office. "Just helping out temporarily," she said with a smile. "Sitting in meetings I used to lead, taking on projects I'd developed. I need you to understand something. I watched my sister slide into my life like she'd always belonged there. And Fred let it happen. If your blood is boiling right now, mine was too, but it got worse. I started noticing things. Fred's office door closed when Ruth was inside. Conversations that stopped when I walked into rooms. Text messages Fred deleted quickly. "You're being paranoid," he said when I mentioned it. "Ruth is family. I'm just helping her through a crisis." But it didn't feel like helping. It felt like replacement. Then I found the documents. I wasn't snooping. I was looking for our tax files in Fred's home office. That's when I saw the folder labeled Penthouse, Property Transfer. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were ownership documents, modified 3 weeks ago, without my knowledge, without my signature. Fred had changed the penthouse ownership structure. Can you imagine? The property that was supposed to be ours, the home I'd designed and decorated, now had Ruth listed as a secondary beneficiary. Not me. Ruth. I felt sick. Actually, physically sick. I confronted Fred that night after Ruth went to bed. "What is this?" I held up the documents. Fred barely looked up from his laptop. "Standard estate planning," he said. "Ruth needs security. She's a family." "I'm your wife," I said, my voice shaking. "She's your sister-in-law who's going through a difficult time," Fred replied, still not looking at me, still typing. "This ensures she has somewhere stable if anything happens to us." "You didn't ask me," I whispered. "I didn't think I needed to," Fred said, finally looking up, his blue eyes cold, distant, like I was a stranger. "It's my property, Nancy. I can structure it however I want." "And here's where it gets worse. Our marriage is a business arrangement, remember?" Fred continued. "You were very clear about keeping finances separate. This doesn't affect you." His words hit like physical blows. Our business arrangement. After 3 years of blurred lines, after midnight conversations and unexpected tenderness, after kisses that weren't in the contract. He was throwing our original agreement back in my face. Ruth's dependency grew daily. She borrowed my clothes without asking, used my car whenever she wanted, rearranged my kitchen to help organize, made herself completely at home. In my home. "Nancy, don't you think the living room would look better with the couch moved?" Ruth would say, making decisions like she owned the place. Fred agreed with all her suggestions. "Ruth has good taste," he'd say. Never mind that I'd spent months designing every detail. I started feeling like a guest in my own penthouse. Invisible, unnecessary, disappearing. Have you ever dealt with someone like this? Someone who slowly takes over your entire life? One morning I came downstairs to find Ruth making Fred's coffee, the exact way he liked it, something I'd done every morning for 3 years. "I've got it," Ruth said brightly. "You sleep in, you look exhausted." Fred thanked her, didn't even glance at me. I stood there watching my sister serve my husband breakfast, in my kitchen, in my home, while I became invisible. That night I heard them laughing in Fred's office. The door was closed. I stood outside listening. Ruth's voice bright and engaging, Fred's deep laugh, the kind of laugh I hadn't heard from him in months. They talked for 2 hours, about business, about strategy, about things Fred used to discuss with me. When Ruth finally emerged, she smiled at me. "Fred is so brilliant," she said. "I don't know how you keep up with him. He's exhausting." But she didn't look exhausted. She looked energized, alive, happy. Everything I used to feel. I went to bed alone that night. Fred stayed up working, or talking to Ruth. I couldn't tell anymore. I lay there in the dark thinking about the ownership documents, thinking about how easily Fred had replaced me, thinking about how Ruth had slid into my life like I'd been keeping it warm for her. Just like always. Ruth, the golden child, Nancy, the placeholder. But Fred didn't know something. Neither of them knew. I hadn't been sitting idle these 3 years. I'd been building, planning, preparing for exactly this moment, because I'd learned long ago that being underestimated was my greatest advantage, and they'd both just made a fatal mistake. They assumed I'd disappear quietly. They assumed I'd accept my role as the invisible wife. They assumed I had nowhere else to go. They assumed wrong. The ownership documents Fred changed, they were about to become very important, just not in the way he thought. Because the penthouse wasn't the only property that mattered, and I wasn't the only one with secrets. Fred was about to learn what happened when you underestimated Nancy Butler. And Ruth was about to discover that some things you take can never really be yours. The foundation was cracking, and I was the earthquake they never saw coming. That conversation at the dining table 3 days ago wasn't the first time Fred mentioned giving Ruth the penthouse. It was just the first time he actually announced it, like a done deal. The first time was 2 weeks earlier. We were in his home office. Ruth was out at another networking event Fred had arranged for her. "I've been thinking," Fred said casually, not looking up from his computer. "Ruth needs something permanent, something stable." "Like what?" I asked, still naive, still trusting. The penthouse, Fred said. It makes sense. She needs stability, and we have the space. I actually laughed, thought he was joking. You're serious? I said when his expression didn't change. Completely logical, Fred replied. She's family. She's struggling. We have resources. This is our home, I said quietly. It's a property, Fred corrected. Just a very nice one. Just a property. The home I'd designed. The space I'd transformed from his sterile showroom into something that felt alive. Just a property. Now pause for a second. That conversation ended with Fred saying he'd think about it more. But he wasn't thinking. He was planning. Making decisions without me, changing ownership documents, preparing to hand over my home to my sister. Which brings us back to 3 nights ago. The dining room. The chandelier. The announcement, "Your sister gets the penthouse," after I'd smiled and said, "Of course." Fred relaxed, went back to his work, assumed everything was settled. But Ruth overheard. She came down the stairs 20 minutes later, her face flushed, eyes too bright. "I can't accept the penthouse," Ruth said. Fred looked up from his laptop. "Ruth, we discussed this." "No, Fred, you don't understand." Ruth's voice shook. "Nancy shouldn't have to give up her home for me. It's too much." "I need you to understand something. This was Ruth's performance, the humble, grateful sister act. She'd perfected it over 30 years. "Nancy already agreed," Fred said simply. Like my agreement was all that mattered, like we'd actually discussed it together, like I'd had any real choice. "Did she?" Ruth turned to me. "Nancy, you can't be okay with this. If your blood is boiling right now, mine was too, because Ruth wanted me to fight for it. Wanted me to look like the selfish one, so she could reluctantly accept while looking like the victim. It's fine," I said quietly. Ruth's face fell. Just for a second, she'd expected me to argue. "I just want you to be comfortable," Ruth said sweetly. "I don't want to be a burden." "You're not a burden," Fred said firmly. "You're family." He never once looked at me when he said it, never asked how I felt. Never considered that his wife might have opinions about giving away her home. "Fred," I said carefully, "we promised to discuss major decisions together." Finally, he looked at me, his blue eyes cold, impatient. "This isn't a major decision, Nancy. It's helping family." "It's our home," I repeated. "It's my property," Fred corrected. There it was, the truth he'd been hiding behind business language. My property, not ours. Mine. "We're married," I said, my voice shaking now. "Doesn't that mean something?" "We're married under a specific agreement," Fred said, his tone corporate now, distant. "An agreement you insisted on. Separate finances, separate assets. This is my asset to manage." Can you imagine? Ruth stood there watching, her eyes wide, playing innocent. But I saw the satisfaction flickering there. "Fred, maybe we should talk about this privately," she said softly. "There's nothing to talk about," Fred replied. "It's already decided." And here's where it gets worse. Something inside me snapped. "When did you decide?" I asked. "Does it matter?" "Yes," I stood up. "It matters when you changed the ownership documents 3 weeks ago without telling me." Fred's jaw tightened. "You went through my files." "I was looking for our tax documents," I said, "and I found papers putting Ruth as a secondary beneficiary on our home. When were you planning to tell me?" "It's estate planning." "It's betrayal," I interrupted, my voice louder now, stronger. "You changed everything about our life without consulting me once." Ruth stepped back. "I should go." "No," I turned to her. "You should stay. You should hear this." Fred stood up, his full height intimidating. "Nancy, you're being dramatic." "Dramatic?" I laughed. It sounded broken even to my own ears. "I've given you 3 years. I've played the perfect wife. I've attended your events and supported your business and made this place a home. And you're giving it away like it means nothing." "It's just a property," Fred repeated. Those 4 words, like a knife. "It's my life," I whispered. Ruth was crying now. Real tears this time, maybe. "I never wanted this," she said. "Nancy, I'll leave. I'll find somewhere else." "You're not going anywhere," Fred said firmly. He looked at me then. Really looked at me for the first time in months. "Nancy, if you can't handle this, maybe you need some space. Take a few days. Clear your head." Let that sink in for a moment. My husband was telling me to leave because I objected to him giving away our home to my sister. "You're right," I said quietly. "I do need space." I walked out of the dining room, past Ruth's fake tears, past Fred's corporate coldness. I went to the one place in the penthouse that was truly mine. The small office off the guest bedroom hallway. Fred had never been inside, didn't even know what I used it for. He thought it was storage, but it was my headquarters, my filing system, my documentation of everything. I locked the door behind me, sat down at my desk, opened the bottom drawer. Inside was a folder I'd been building for 3 years. Documents, contracts, property records. The truth Fred had never bothered to discover. My hands were steady now, calm, because this was the moment I'd been unconsciously preparing for. I opened the folder to the property trust documents, the ones created 7 years ago, when Fred needed my grandfather's property to save Harrington Square, when I'd signed over the land as collateral, what Fred never knew, what he never asked, what he assumed he understood. The property trust didn't just include the Pennsylvania land, it included everything developed from it, every asset generated, every derivative property, and the Harrington Square development had been wildly successful, worth $40 million now, all held in a trust. In my name alone, because I'd negotiated it that way with Fred's lawyers, while Fred was busy with other deals, while everyone assumed I didn't understand business. Think about that. But that wasn't even the important part. The important part was on page 17. The clause about derivative assets. When Fred built the penthouse 2 years into our marriage, he'd used profits from Harrington Square, transferred funds from the trust to finance construction, which meant legally the penthouse was a derivative asset, owned by the trust which I controlled. Have you ever dealt with someone who underestimated you so completely? Fred thought he owned this penthouse. He'd put his name on the deed, changed beneficiary documents, made unilateral decisions. But he'd never actually read the original trust agreement, never followed the money trail back, never imagined his wife was smart enough to plan this far ahead. The penthouse wasn't his to give away. It was mine, always had been. I just let him think otherwise, because being underestimated is the greatest advantage. I sat there with the documents spread before me. 7 years of careful planning, 7 years of staying quiet, 7 years of watching and waiting and building my foundation. Fred wanted to give Ruth the penthouse? Perfect. Let him try. I picked up my phone, called my lawyer, the one Fred didn't know I had. "Marcus, it's Nancy Butler," I said quietly. "I need you to file something for me tomorrow morning." "What are we filing?" Marcus asked. "A declaration of trust ownership," I replied, "and papers to remove Fred Billups as a resident of property located at—" I gave him the penthouse address. "Are you sure?" Marcus asked carefully. "Completely. This will cause significant problems." "I know. Nancy, once we file this, there's no going back." And if you think that was the moment everything changed, you have no idea what's coming, because Fred's about to realize exactly how much he's lost, and Ruth's about to learn what it means to finally stand up for someone else. Hit that subscribe button right now, because what happened next changed everything. "File it," I said. "First thing tomorrow." I hung up. Sat in my small office listening to Fred and Ruth talking in the other room, their voices low, comfortable, planning my displacement. I looked down at the trust documents, at the penthouse deed, at 3 years of evidence that Fred had been using trust assets as his personal property, at the foundation of his empire that he'd accidentally built on my land. I stood up, walked to my door, unlocked it quietly. Fred and Ruth were still in the dining room. I could hear them clearly now. "She'll be fine," Ruth was saying. "Nancy always lands on her feet." "She's more dramatic than I expected," Fred replied. "She's always been emotional." They were discussing me like I was a problem to manage, an obstacle to remove. I walked into the dining room. They both stopped talking immediately. "Nancy," Fred started. "I need to tell you something," I said calmly, my voice steady, clear, powerful. "The penthouse," I continued. "You can't give it to Ruth." "Nancy, we've been through this." Fred's voice had that corporate edge. "No, Fred," I smiled. "You don't understand." I placed the trust documents on the dining table, right between them. "You can't give away what you don't own." Fred stared at the papers, his face going pale. "What is this?" "That's the property trust from 7 years ago," I said. "The one created when I gave you my grandfather's land, the one you never actually read." I pointed to the relevant section. "Page 17. Derivative Assets Clause. Everything generated from trust property remains in the trust. Everything funded by trust assets becomes trust property." Fred was reading now, really reading. Understanding dawning on his face. "The penthouse was built with Harrington Square profits," I continued. "Harrington Square exists because of my grandfather's property, which means this penthouse is a derivative asset." I looked at Ruth, her face confused, scared. "Which means this penthouse belongs to the trust," I finished. "A trust I control, not Fred." The silence was absolute. Finally, Fred looked up at me, his blue eyes wide, shocked, seeing me clearly for the first time in years. "Nancy, you can't be serious." "I'm dead serious," I said quietly. "And tomorrow morning my lawyers are filing papers to clarify the ownership, publicly." "This will destroy," Fred started. "What?" I interrupted. "Your reputation, your image, your ability to make unilateral decisions about my life?" I leaned forward, looked him directly in the eyes. "Fred, you wanted a business arrangement. You wanted separate assets. You wanted no emotional complications." I smiled. "Congratulations. You got exactly what you asked for." Ruth was crying again. "Nancy, I never meant—" "Yes, you did," I said simply. "You both did. You just thought I'd disappear quietly like I always have." I turned to walk away, then stopped, looked back at them both. Two people who'd systematically underestimated me. Two people who'd forgotten who I really was. "Oh, and Fred," I said, "you might want to review all the other properties you've built over the last 7 years because quite a few of them used Harrington Square funding." His face went white. "You can't give away what you don't own," I repeated softly. "And it turns out you don't own nearly as much as you think you do." I walked out, leaving them in that too-bright dining room, under that crystal chandelier, surrounded by the luxury built on my sacrifice, and for the first time in 30 years, I wasn't invisible anymore. I left Fred and Ruth sitting at that dining table, walked away from their shocked faces, from the trust documents spread between them, from 7 years of secrets finally revealed. My hands were shaking now, not from fear, from adrenaline, from power I'd hidden for so long. I went to my small office, the one Fred never bothered to enter, locked the door behind me, sat down at my desk in the dark, and I waited. Because this was the moment everything changed. Now pause for a second. I just destroyed Fred's carefully constructed world, exposed that he didn't own what he thought he owned, that his wife had been 10 steps ahead the entire time, that the penthouse he'd promised to Ruth belonged to me. I heard footsteps in the hallway. Someone knocked softly on my door. "Nancy?" Ruth's voice. "Can we talk?" I didn't answer immediately. Let her wait. Let her wonder. "Please," Ruth said. "I need to understand." I stood up, unlocked the door. Ruth stood there, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. Eyes red and swollen, makeup completely ruined. Her usual perfect composure shattered. "Come in," I said. Ruth entered my small office carefully, looking around like she'd never seen it before. She hadn't. This was my space, my sanctuary. My headquarters. Sit, I said. She sat in the chair across from my desk, exactly where I wanted her. Let that sink in for a moment. For the first time in our entire lives, Ruth was in my territory, playing by my rules, waiting for me to speak first. The trust is real, I said simply. Everything I told you and Fred is true. How long have you known? Ruth whispered. Known what? That you owned the penthouse, that Fred couldn't give it to me. Since the day it was built, I said. I've always known. Ruth stared at me. Why didn't you tell him? Because powerful people stay powerful by underestimating others, I replied. Fred needed to believe he controlled everything. I let him believe it. For 7 years. For 7 years, I confirmed. Ruth shook her head slowly. I don't understand. Why would you let him think? Because I needed to see who he really was, I interrupted. What he'd do when he thought I was powerless. How he'd treat me when he believed he held all the cards. If you're thinking this sounds calculated, you're absolutely right, because it was. I'd spent 7 years watching, learning, preparing. And now you know, Ruth said quietly. Now I know, I agreed. Silence filled the room, heavy with 30 years of complicated history. Nancy, I need to tell you something, Ruth said finally. I'm listening. Ruth took a shaky breath. Fred called me 3 months ago, 2 days after I lost my job, before I'd told anyone, even Mom. I leaned forward. How did he know? I don't know, Ruth admitted, but he knew everything. About Marcus cheating, about the firm letting me go, about my lease ending, everything. Can you imagine? Fred had been tracking my sister, planning her return. He offered to help, Ruth continued. Said I should come stay with you both, that Nancy would want her sister close, that it was the perfect solution. Perfect for what? I asked. Ruth looked down at her hands. For keeping you from leaving him. And here's where it gets worse. He told me you'd been distant, Ruth said, that the marriage was failing, that you had 1 foot out the door already, that giving me the penthouse would tie you to the family, make it harder for you to leave. I sat back in my chair, everything clicking into place. Fred hadn't been generous, he'd been strategic, using Ruth as insurance, as leverage, as a chain to bind me. He played us against each other, I said. Yes, Ruth whispered, and I let him. I was so desperate, so broken, that I didn't question it. I just took what he offered. Did you know he was going to give you the penthouse? Not at first, Ruth said. He mentioned it 2 weeks ago, said it was already decided, that you'd agreed, that it was the logical solution, and I should just accept it gracefully. I need you to understand something. Fred had manipulated both of us. Told Ruth I'd agreed, told me Ruth needed it, created a situation where we'd turn on each other instead of on him. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Ruth looked up at me, her eyes desperate, genuine. Because I'm tired of being the person who takes everything, she said. I'm tired of using you as my safety net. I'm tired of being the golden child who never has to face consequences. You've been that person for 30 years, I pointed out. I know. Tears streamed down Ruth's face, and I hate myself for it. Every single day I hate what I've become. Think about that. My perfect sister, the golden child, sitting in my office crying about hating herself. I took your money for Yale, Ruth continued, never paid it back. Took your sacrifice and never even said thank you properly. I've ignored you for years unless I needed something, and now I almost took your home. You didn't take it, I corrected. Fred tried to give it to you. I should have refused harder, Ruth said. I should have questioned why he was being so generous. I should have protected you instead of thinking about myself. If your blood is boiling right now, mine was too. But not at Ruth anymore, at Fred, at the man who'd orchestrated all of this. Ruth, can I ask you something? I said. Anything. In the last 3 months, how many times has Fred talked about me? Ruth thought carefully. Every day, she said finally, multiple times a day. What does he say? That you're brilliant, Ruth replied. That you're smarter than he ever realized, that you could destroy him if you wanted to, that he needs to keep you close, keep you happy, keep you from walking away. He's afraid of me, I said slowly. Terrified, Ruth confirmed. He talks about you like you're this ticking time bomb he can't defuse, like he knows something's coming but can't figure out what. I stood up, walked to my window, looked out at the city lights below. My city, my penthouse, my life that I'd built in the shadows. He should be afraid, I said quietly. What are you going to do? Ruth asked. I turned back to face her. I'm going to show him exactly what happens when you underestimate your wife. Ruth nodded slowly. Can I help? I studied my sister carefully, looking for the manipulation, the angle, the old Ruth who took without giving. But I saw something different, something that might be real change. Can you? I asked. Can you actually help me instead of helping yourself? Yes, Ruth said firmly. I swear to you, Nancy, I want to be different. I want to be the sister you deserved all along. Words are easy, I said. I know. Ruth stood up. So let me prove it. Whatever you need, whatever it takes. I'm on your side this time. Have you ever dealt with someone who's trying to change, someone who's asking for one more chance? It's the hardest decision to make. Tomorrow morning my lawyers are filing papers, I said, making the trust ownership public. It's going to create chaos. Fred's reputation will take a hit. Investors will question everything. Good, Ruth said. You might get caught in the fallout, I warned. I don't care. Ruth's voice was steady now. He used us both. He deserves whatever's coming. I looked at my sister, really looked at her, seeing her clearly for maybe the first time. Okay, I said. Then here's what we're going to do. I spent the next hour explaining my plan to Ruth, showing her the documents, the trust structure, the derivative assets clause, the properties Fred thought he owned but actually didn't. Ruth listened carefully, asked smart questions, took notes. This is brilliant, she said finally. Nancy, you've been building this for 7 years. Longer, I admitted. I started planning the day I met Fred. I just didn't know what I was planning for until now. He's going to lose everything, isn't he? Ruth asked. Not everything, I corrected. Just everything built on my foundation, which is most of his empire. Ruth smiled. A real smile. Proud, maybe. Our little sister, she said softly. The invisible one. The one nobody paid attention to. You were the dangerous one all along. I learned from the best, I said. You taught me how to be underestimated. Ruth's smile faded. I'm sorry, Nancy. For everything. For 30 years of taking you for granted. Show me through actions, I said. Not words. I will. Ruth stood up. Starting now, what do you need first? I looked at my sister. My complicated, flawed, finally maybe changing sister. I need you to go talk to Fred, I said. Tell him you're declining the penthouse, that you can't accept it, that it's not right. He'll try to convince me. Let him, I interrupted. Let him show you exactly how manipulative he can be. Record it if you can. I need documentation of everything. Ruth nodded. Anything else? Yes, I said. Tomorrow, when everything goes public, Fred's going to try to control the narrative. He'll want you to support his version of events, to stand by his side. What should I do? Stand by mine instead, I said simply. Ruth's eyes filled with tears again. I will. I promise. She moved toward the door, then stopped, turned back. Nancy? Yes? Thank you, Ruth said quietly, for not giving up on me, for giving me a chance to be better. Don't thank me yet, I said. Prove you deserve the chance first. Ruth nodded and left. I sat alone in my office, listening to her footsteps retreat down the hallway, listening to her knock on Fred's office door, listening to his voice invite her in. They talked for 20 minutes. I couldn't hear the words, but I could imagine them. Fred trying to convince Ruth to accept the penthouse, Ruth declining. Fred getting frustrated, Ruth holding firm for maybe the first time in her life. When Ruth emerged, she came straight back to my office. "I recorded everything," she said, holding up her phone. "He tried every manipulation tactic he knows, guilt, logic, appeals to family loyalty, everything." And I said no," Ruth replied. "I told him the penthouse belongs to you and I won't take what's yours ever again." I took her phone, listened to the recording, heard Fred's voice getting more desperate, more controlling, more afraid. "Perfect," I said. "This is exactly what I needed." Ruth smiled. "What happens now?" I looked at my sister, my ally for the first time ever. "Now we wait," I said. "Tomorrow morning the papers get filed, and Fred Billups learns what it costs to underestimate the women in his life." "Both of us," Ruth said. "Both of us," I agreed. We sat there together in my small office, two sisters who'd spent 30 years on opposite sides, finally united against the man who'd tried to divide us. Fred thought he'd won, thought he'd secured his position, thought he'd controlled us both. But he'd made one fatal mistake. He'd assumed we'd never compare notes, never see through his manipulation, never stand together. And that mistake was about to cost him everything. The foundation was cracking, the empire was crumbling, and the invisible wife he'd underestimated for 7 years was about to become very, very visible. Tomorrow, the whole world would know. But tonight I savored the quiet before the storm, the moment before everything changed. The last night Fred Billups would ever sleep, thinking he controlled anything at all. I didn't sleep that night. Just sat in my office reviewing every document, every piece of evidence, every truth Fred had never bothered to discover. By 6 a.m. I was ready. I showered, dressed in my most powerful outfit, black pantsuit Fred had once said made me look intimidating. Good. I wanted him intimidated. Fred was already awake when I entered the kitchen, sitting at the counter with his coffee, staring at his laptop, but not really seeing it. He looked terrible, hair uncombed, still wearing yesterday's clothes, dark circles under his eyes. "We need to talk," I said. Fred looked up. His blue eyes were different now, no longer cold, no longer distant, just afraid. "Nancy, about last night?" "Not here," I interrupted. "Your office, now." I walked away without waiting for his response, heard his chair scrape against the floor as he followed. We entered his home office, the place where he'd made every decision about our lives, where he'd planned to give away my home, where he'd manipulated my sister. I closed the door behind us. Now, pause for a second. This was it. 7 years building to this moment, 7 years of being underestimated, 7 years of watching and planning. Time to show Fred Billups exactly who he'd married. I laid a stack of documents on his desk. "Do you know what these are?" I asked. Fred glanced at them. "Nancy, I've already seen—" "No, Fred," I spread them out. "You saw the trust agreement last night. These are different." I pointed to the first document. "The Harrington Square development, built on my grandfather's property. Trust asset." Second document. "The Riverside renovation, funded with Harrington Square profits. Trust asset." Third document. "The Parkside Towers, also funded with trust money. Trust asset." I kept going. Document after document, property after property. "The downtown retail complex, trust asset. The waterfront condos, trust asset. The commercial plaza on 5th Avenue, trust asset." Fred's face was getting paler with each one. "How many?" he whispered. 17 properties, I said calmly. 17 major developments over 7 years, all funded with money generated from my property, all legally belonging to the trust I control. Let that sink in for a moment. "That's over half my portfolio," Fred said. "Correction," I replied. "It's over half of what you thought was your portfolio. It was never yours, Fred. You built your empire on my foundation." Fred stood up abruptly, started pacing, running his hands through his hair. "Why didn't you tell me?" he demanded. Why didn't you ask? I countered. I trusted you. You controlled me, I interrupted. There's a difference. Fred turned to face me. That's not fair, Nancy. I gave you everything. You gave me nothing I didn't earn, I said, and you took everything you could without asking. I paid your mother's medical bills. As part of our business arrangement, I reminded him, the arrangement you're so fond of referencing, the one where we keep everything separate. Remember? Can you imagine? Watching Fred realize his own words were being used against him. Nancy, please, his voice cracked. Can we just talk about this reasonably? We are talking reasonably, I said. I'm simply informing you of the legal reality, something you should have verified 7 years ago. Fred sat down heavily in his chair. My lawyers reviewed that trust agreement. Your lawyers skimmed it, I corrected. They assumed I was too naive to negotiate properly. They underestimated me, just like you did. I never— Yes, you did, I said firmly. You've underestimated me from day one. The grateful employee, the accommodating wife, the woman who'd accept whatever you decided. Fred looked up at me, really looked at me. That's not how I see you. Isn't it? I challenged. You gave away my home without consulting me. You manipulated my sister to control me. You've been minimizing my role in your company for months, all because you assumed I had nowhere else to go. Nancy, I was trying to protect you. From what? My voice rose now. From having a voice, from having power, from having choices. And here's where it gets worse. Fred stood up again. Moved toward me. I was trying to protect us, he said desperately. This marriage, this life we built. You mean the business arrangement? I said coldly. It stopped being just business years ago, Fred said. You know that. Do I? I challenged. Because 3 days ago you referenced our business arrangement to justify giving away my home. I was wrong. Fred's voice broke. I know I was wrong. If your blood is boiling right now, mine was too, because part of me wanted to forgive him. Part of me wanted to believe he meant it. But I learned not to trust words without actions. Why, Fred? I asked quietly. Why did you bring Ruth here? Why did you manipulate both of us? Fred turned away, couldn't meet my eyes. Because I was afraid, he admitted. Of what? Of losing you. He turned back. Nancy, you're brilliant. You're capable. You could walk away from all of this and be fine, better than fine, and I couldn't stand the thought of it. I need you to understand something. This was the first time Fred had ever admitted vulnerability. The first time he'd shown me fear instead of control. So you created insurance, I said. Used Ruth to tie me down. I wanted to give you reasons to stay, Fred said. Your sister needed help. The penthouse would keep her close, which would keep you close. That's not love, Fred, I said. That's manipulation. I know. Fred moved closer. I know it was wrong. I know I should have just talked to you, but I don't know how to do this. Do what? Be vulnerable. Fred's voice was barely audible now. Be anything other than in control. My whole life I've built things, acquired things, made deals. That's what I know how to do. He reached for my hand. I pulled away. You can't acquire me, Fred, I said firmly. You can only lose me. Think about that. Fred's face crumbled. Have I already lost you? I don't know, I said honestly. You've spent 7 years treating me like an asset to manage instead of a partner to trust. Nancy, please. Did you ever love me? I interrupted. Or was I just another acquisition? Fred stared at me. How can you ask that? Because you've never said it, I replied. Not once in 7 years. Not in our marriage vows. Not in our business contract. Never. It wasn't part of our agreement. Exactly, I said. It wasn't part of the agreement. So I need to know, Fred. Do you love me? Or do you just love having me? Silence filled the office, heavy, suffocating. Finally, Fred spoke. I love you, he whispered. God help me, Nancy. I love you so much it terrifies me. My breath caught. 7 years. 7 years I'd waited to hear those words. "When did you know?" I asked. 3 years ago, Fred admitted. Maybe longer. I tried to ignore it, tried to keep it professional, but every day it got harder. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because it wasn't in the contract," Fred said. "Because I thought if I acknowledged it, you'd leave. You'd see it as a violation of our agreement." Have you ever dealt with someone who loved you wrong, who felt everything but expressed nothing? "So you hid it, kid," I said. "You buried it under control and manipulation and power plays." "Yes," Fred admitted, "because control is what I know. Love is terrifying." I looked at my husband, this powerful billionaire who commanded rooms with his presence, reduced to a man who couldn't say 3 simple words for 3 years. "Fred, you've become everything you probably hated," I said quietly. "Another rich man who uses wealth as leverage instead of building something real." "I know." Fred's voice broke completely. "I know, and I hate myself for it." "Do you understand what you've done?" I asked. "You had something real. We had real moments, real connection, real potential." "I ruined it," Fred whispered. "You tried to acquire it," I corrected, "like it was another property, another deal, another thing to control." I walked to the door, needed distance, needed air. "Where are you going?" Fred asked desperately. "I don't know," I said, "but I can't be here right now." "Nancy, please don't leave." "You left me months ago." "Fred," I said, "when you stopped seeing me as a partner, when you started treating me like a problem to solve. I'm just finally walking away from the ghost of what we could have been." "What about the trust?" Fred asked. "What about the properties?" "My lawyers will handle it," I said. "Everything will be done legally and fairly." "I don't care about the properties," Fred said desperately. "I care about you." "Then you should have shown me that when it mattered," I replied. I opened the door. "Nancy." Fred's voice stopped me. "I love you. I know I said it wrong and too late, but I do." "I love you." I turned back one last time, looked at the man I'd married 7 years ago, the man who'd seen me once and then forgotten how to look. "I know you do, Fred," I said softly, "but love without trust is just another form of control." "And I'm done being controlled." I walked out, down the hallway, past Ruth, who was standing in her doorway. "Nancy?" she called. "I'll call you later," I said. I grabbed my purse, my keys, walked out of the penthouse, my penthouse that I'd owned all along. The elevator ride down felt like flying, like freedom, like the first breath after drowning. Behind me, in the penthouse, Fred stood alone, in his office, in our home, in the silence he'd created. For the first time since our marriage, he was completely, utterly alone, and he finally understood what he'd lost. Not properties, not wealth, not power, but the only person who'd ever really seen him and chosen to stay anyway, until he gave her no choice but to leave. 4 days after I walked out, Fred found me, not as a CEO, not with a lawyer, just Fred. No suit, no mask, no defenses. He called first. His voice was softer than I'd ever heard. "Can we meet? Please, no contracts, no negotiations, just us." I agreed, not because I'd forgiven him, but because I needed to see if he'd changed. We met in the park near the penthouse. Cold wind, empty benches. The city below looked smaller from here. Fred stood waiting by the fountain. He looked tired, smaller somehow. Not the billionaire, just the man. He didn't try to touch me, didn't try to convince me. He just looked at me and said, "I'm sorry." No excuses, no justifications, no corporate jargon. He admitted everything. The manipulation, the fear, the need to control instead of trust. "I was terrified of losing you, Nancy. I thought if you saw how much I loved you, you'd run. Because part of me knew you'd never stand for being controlled. You deserve better than deals and conditions." I listened, really listened, and for the first time I heard truth instead of calculation. He didn't ask me to come home. He said, "You don't owe me another chance, but if you want to build something real, I'm willing to start from nothing. No deals, no power games, no contracts." I told him my terms. I want a real marriage, Fred. No leverage. No money strings, no decisions without me. No more owning or acquiring. Only choosing together every day. Fred nodded. I agree, he said. Whatever it takes, even if it means I don't get you back. He handed me a folder. Inside, paperwork transferring all property rights, irrevocably securing the penthouse in my trust, with no loopholes left. I'm moving out, Fred said quietly. I need to rebuild your trust. And I know I can't do that living under the same roof. I watched him breathe, watched him choose to let go. Ruth was waiting for me at the apartment. She wrapped me in a hug. You don't have to forgive him if you don't want to, she said. You only have to do what puts you back in control of your own life. Her words finally set me free. Over the next weeks, Fred sent texts, called, but never pushed. He asked if we could start over, take things slow, go on real dates, learn who we were, not as negotiators, not as business partners, but as two people who wanted, freely, to be together. I said yes, not because I trusted him again yet, but because he met me as an equal for the first time. We walked in the park, talked late into the night about dreams, history, mistakes, and the messy business of love. Sometimes we argued, sometimes we laughed, sometimes I made him work for every step. He never demanded. He waited. He listened. He apologized every time old wounds surfaced. He chose me not as a deal, not as insurance, but because he loved me and finally said so in every word and every action. I decided to keep the penthouse in my trust, not as a weapon, not as revenge, but as a promise to myself. This is my safety, Fred, my independence, my history. If we build something new, it's not because I have to stay, but because I choose to. I know, he replied, and I'm grateful. He moved to a smaller apartment across the city. We started dating. No more contracts, no more power games. Just two people taking it one day at a time, negotiating nothing except love and honesty. If you've ever had to rebuild trust from scratch, you know it's slow, it's hard. But some things are worth starting over. And for the first time in my life, the penthouse was mine. And for the first time, Fred realized he wanted my heart more than the view. If Nancy's journey moved you, hit that like button right now, because every woman who's ever been underestimated deserves to see this story. Every woman who's ever been the second choice needs to know she's enough. Every woman who's built something in the shadows while everyone looked the other way. That like button is for you. Now I want to hear from you. Drop a comment and tell me, what city are you watching from? I love knowing where my community is around the world. Are you watching from New York? London? Sydney? Drop your city below. And here's the thing. If you want more stories about women who refused to stay invisible, women who played the long game and won, women who turned being underestimated into their greatest weapon, you need to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Because I post stories like this every week that will remind you of your power. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening to Nancy's story. Thank you for being part of this community. And remember, being underestimated is only dangerous when they forget you're watching. I'll see you in the next one.